everyone please be seated? A warm good evening to everyone present here. I, Lily,
And I, Srishti,
welcome you to the inaugural evening of Litnight'24, a celebration of literature that has inked a magnificent legacy of love, light, and togetherness.
it is our greatest privilege to have amongst us Mr. Mrityunjay Sharma, sir, a first generation politician, entrepreneur, and a best selling author, an engineering graduate from BIT Mesra, Ranchi, and an MBA from XLRI Jamshedpur. Sir has worked in various senior HR roles at Asian Paints before moving to the hinterlands of Chattisgarh, where he worked with the then Chief Minister Dr. Raman Singh on developmental issues. He subsequently moved to his home state of Jharkhand to join politics and work at the grassroots. He is currently the convener election management for BJP Jharkhand. Sir is the co-founder of Ranchi-based startup BioFi. He also runs a social initiative called Kartavyapath to teach mathematics to underprivileged children and is a visiting faculty at several institutes, including the IIMs. His book, Broken Promises, Caste, Crime, and Politics in Bihar, is currently the top selling book in multiple genres. Let's give a huge round of applause for Sir.
We also have amongst us the Dean of Student Affairs, Dr. Bhaskar Karn. He is a beacon of knowledge and wisdom who has tirelessly nurtured young minds and has helped in shaping the future of our nation.
We would like to inaugurate the session by inviting Dr. Bhaskar Karn to felicitate our esteemed speaker with shawl and memento. Now we would like to call upon the stage. Now we would like to call upon the stage Dr. Neeraj Kumar Singh, Faculty Advisor, the Literary Society, to honor Dr. Bhaskar Karn with a shawl and a bouquet.
Uh, now, now we would urge. Now, we would call upon the stage Dr. Bhaskar Karn to enlighten us with a few words.
Uh, Mr. Mrityunjay Sharma, Dr. Neeraj, and my dear young friends. Probably you have not come to hear me, you have come to hear Mr. Sharma, who will fulfill his promise, even though the book is broken promise. But what I actually want to state is, I heard him in quite a few interviews of his about this book. And that book is very fascinating. In Hindi, there is a term called dastaવેz. So this book is actually a dastaવેz of whole 90s of Bihar. Means it must have collection for everyone. But while analyzing through his interviews, what I actually thought of that what must have made him to write this book? What was behind the scene processes? Means it's only my assumption. I may be wrong. The first of all is when you have when somebody joins in public life and have promised a lot and couldn't sustain with that promise because of lack of vision, lack of enthusiasm, or maybe enthusiasm you can replace it with another word, or the values you stood for at that point of time which you could not fulfill. Those are the issues must have been in his mind when started writing, because at that point of time and before whatever even preceded 1990s, the historical background that the book has, because it's a time domain about its encryptions, I tried to relate this one with a book called Man's Worldly Goods by Leo Huberman. I see this book is a stage forward to that particular book. And why I say that if you go through that particular book, you will come to know the economics of the societies. In fact, that book deals with history of economics and economics of history. And the state in which we are, or a nation is at that given point of time, and the kind of values prevalent at that point of time, that you can analyze by reading that book. So, why, if you relate this one with this thing, that you will find a person reaches to his pinnacle at a given point of time, and then suddenly you have a drop. Not because of the uh, what should I say is uh, because of his at that point of time given knowledge, but the society one belonged to, what was prevalent. And obviously, when you have those things and you start taking some shortcut measures, this is what you end up with. Because success and development, these are the two things, doesn't have any shortcuts. You have to go through the process. Those are very tough lines, means, and you have to stand by your values. You will be criticized, you will be rejected, sometimes you also feel dejected. Many of things you go through, but still you have to come up. And when somebody is not able to come up or withstand with the aspiration of the people, this is what leads to. And this must be read by all the students, or for in fact by everybody. Not because of the book gives so many statistics and so many uh, examples, but to learn that you should not deviate from your path. This is what I infer from this. The path that you have selected, there will be some tough times, but you have to believe in yourself. And once you believe in yourself, you reach to the destiny where you actually want to. That is why I will end up with a quote of Nelson Mandela: don't judge me with my success, judge me that, with that how many times I fell down but still had the ability to come up. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words.
श्री राम मनोहर लोहिया जी कहते हैं, चर्चा और तर्क वितर्क के बिना समाज में ना तो विचारों का प्रवाह होता है, ना ही विकास. This statement by one of our freedom fighters not only highlights the importance of debates and discussion in the society, but also mentions that no society will ever be truly free if the people do not have the freedom of opinion. Our former Prime Minister, Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee, once said, words have the power to shape the world, to bring the change, and to ignite revolution.
With that being said, let's begin our most awaited speaker session with Mr. Mrityunjay Sharma, sir. So, when we found out that you are a BIT alumni, we were immensely overjoyed and proud. So, our first question would be, how does it feel to be back here today? What are the things that you feel have changed around here, and what are the things that have stayed constant?
So, in fact, I'm audible to everyone. So, in fact, a lot of things, a lot of connections here, to be honest. Not just the fact that I graduated from here. Uh, your dean of student welfare we happen to be related. We got related much later. He happens to be my in-law. Uh, my wife studied from the same college in same batch, albeit a different branch. Neeraj sir happens to be a very close friend. So a lot of memories. I happen to be from this state. Ranchi, I call Ranchi my hometown now. So, it's a college which is situated in my hometown. So a lot of connections and, and then it's been almost 15 years now that I passed out from this college. But still somehow, I keep coming back in some or the other manner, right? And this time it's a very different kind of a engagement in which I'm back, which is I had never thought of, to be very honest. I never thought of that someday I would write a book and maybe it gets published and it gets as famous as it has become maybe. So I never thought that would be one connection that would get established here. So it's always good to be here, to be very honest. It feels like home, right? It never feels like I've lost any connection to the college. So yeah, good to be back home.
Yes, sir. Moving on, recently I got the opportunity to read your book, Broken Promises, Caste, Crime and Politics in Bihar. Though I am more inclined towards reading fictional books, this was one of the very few non-fiction books that kept me up till 2 in the morning. Once I started reading it, I couldn't stop myself. So my question to you would be on the behalf of all the budding writers. How can a writer build a narrative that is so powerful, which holds the reader attention throughout the entire book in this tech-savvy world where the attention span of people is exceedingly low?
Thank you. And that's a very good question, to be honest. So, first of all, thank you for the fact that you found it to be too engaging to be able to read it at 2 in the night. Very honestly, this is a feedback that I've gotten from a few others as well. So I'll take that, as something genuine. I tried to write the book in a manner in which what happens, see, many a times when you see non-fiction books are generally written in a manner in which it becomes a more of a compendium, right? Or something of a collection of facts. So while for researchers, for very serious readers, it is okay to read. But for a general en masse, it becomes very difficult to read, right? And I would not want to quote names of books because they are very good in their own genres. But I've always thought that those books could be written in much more, engaging format that would, of course, serve the purpose of conveying that information as well as trying to reach to a much wider audience. See, the whole purpose of a movie or a book or any art form in the world, book is also, literature is also, I would say, a art form, right? Any art form in the world should be to reach and influence as many people as possible, right? So if that purpose is not met, I think then the secondary things take a front seat. At my personal level, how I came across writing it as a story, which I've tried to. So anybody who picks up the book and if you start reading the first few pages, you'll feel like you're reading a story, right? Uh, I think it comes from the fact that I have been more of a, I write a lot of poetry, right? Hindi poetry specifically, Neeraj sir knows, and then a lot of short stories also. So that is what I have been doing for the last 15, 20 years. So that had very inherently gotten into me. So even when I started writing this book as a non-fiction, I said, let's write it as something which when somebody picks up and starts reading, they do not, lose their attention for even a minute. So it's something like those, and these days I have to be on social media a lot, right? It's a professional hazard for me, being in politics and So in social media, I see a lot of terms being used like hooks, right? So there has to be a hook every few seconds or minutes wherein the audience does not lose any attention. So I thought the book should also be written in a manner in which at every instance, there has to be something which pulls the reader in and makes him continue. So that was the entire intent, and I think it's served the purpose. Yeah.
So, continuing on the same note, the two of us also belong to Bihar. And while reading this book, you mentioned some of the anecdotes, folklore, names of gangsters and mafias in Bihar. And while we were narrating it to our parents and some our friends and their parents, so they all related to it. They recognized the names, they recognized the folklore, and it resonated with them. So, while writing this book, how did you conduct such an accurate and intensive research for it?
So I think some of it comes very naturally to me because I have been born and brought up in the same place. I was born and brought up in a place called Rajrappa, if some of you would know. Whoever is from this region of the country would definitely know. So that used to be an undivided Bihar, right? The times when we were growing up. So a lot of things, at least, we used to hear from our parents, society, newspapers at times. So we could relate to a lot of those things. Uh, when you start researching into it, of course, you would have to write any book. In fact, the previous question also had some parts of it. To write any book, specifically fiction or non-fiction, I would say, you have to read a lot. So, uh, general principles that you would say some writers saying that if you want to write one page, you should read 10 pages, right? It is only then you will be able to write a good one page. So in non-fiction also, you should read as much as possible that has been written on that topic, that genre, that era, anything that you can get your hands on. And if you're able to read all of that first, it helps you build your own story. It helps you validate many things. So for example, the same anecdote that I would have quoted in the book would have been quoted in 10 different ways in 10 different sources. But when you start reading all of them, you start getting a hang of what's the actual line, right? Some of it would have been exaggerations in some places. In some places, you would see, no, ye thoda pad ke bhi sahi nahi lag raha hai, right? Even if it is written there, let's not quote this. So when you read it from various sources, you start getting a common thread. You would say, this is something which is definitely established, right? This is something which I can definitely quote. From there, you can build on. And hence, the first point to start writing any such book, anything of that sort, I would say you have to read anything and everything that's possible. Uh, Second, if you have sources available, you should talk to a lot of people, right? You should talk to people who have undergone that era, seen those things happening around them. If there are people who have been involved in those things, right? Talk to them. Right? It gives you very different perspectives. So, for example, many things that you would see quoted in books and newspapers and magazines of that era, uh, may just be manifestation of things that would have happened, but they would not give you the underlying reasons of the things that would have happened. That you would only come to know if you are able to talk to people who have actually seen that unfold, right? Whatever we read, let's say 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line of an event is a very simplified version of an event. So for example, when we right now read of Indian independence movement, we read so little of the, only the major non-cooperation movement, quit India movement, civil disobedience movement, Congress, thoda bahut Bhagat Singh, Chandrasekhar Azad, last mein IIM. That's it. But that's not independence movement. That would not even be 10% of the entire independence movement. So and hence, now let's say somebody has to write on the independence movement in a certain way that they would want to. They would have to read a lot, and then reach out to as many sources as possible. Then you would realize that whatever you have been reading is just 10% of what should have been conveyed. Yeah.
So the next question is, in your book you have talked about how people from Bihar are reluctant to identify themselves as Bihari.
I don't know if it happens now or not.
Sir, it happens.
So in fact, uh, just two or 3 days ago, so I also keep receiving a lot of messages on social media. So a couple of days ago on Instagram, I received a message which is from a guy who's just graduated from IT Delhi, and he had read my book or seen one of my podcasts, and he was able to relate to some of the things. So he messaged me that I used to live in the same Katwaria Sarai. I used to take the same 511 bus. I used to go to FitG, and so I could relate so much to it. And I was being mocked for being a Bihari and so on. He's a very famous singer as of now. I don't know if you follow him. His name is Dipanshu. He uses a something called Eclipse Nova or something.
Eclipse Nova,
Yeah.
yes.
So he says some. So I didn't know, to be honest, but then I saw that his songs were very famous. So he said, I have felt exactly the same. So I said, I'm sad that it still happens, right? Back in those days, to be very honest, uh, you would not realize that unless you went out of the state. But when we went out of the state, for example, I went out of the state for the first time when I had to prepare for my JEE exams. I went to Delhi for FitG. There you would realize the magnanimity of the fact that how uh, uh, we are looked down upon, how badly, right? And then so these days it would happen, but maybe more subtly, I would say. But back in those days, even let's say DTC bus drivers and conductors, they would be like, यार कोई भी अगर दौड़ के अगर रोड क्रॉस कर गया बस के सामने से तो चिल्ला देंगे अरे बिहारी है क्या, right? So it would be like a common name for anybody who's stupid, who's doing the wrong things, right? So it was very, and maybe you would not have personally come. So maybe personally nobody came across and said something very bad to me because I was from Bihar. But when you hear it so many times in so many forms, it hurts you too, right? Because it's also your identity. Or maybe even if somebody does not say that, but let's say when they have a certain expression, after you tell them where you come from. So that's very, I would say, kind of demeaning, right? And the best they would say is the best expression that they would give is an expression of pity, maybe. Okay, sympathize with you that you are from that place, which also does not help, right? Which is as bad, right? So yeah, I think it still happens. It still happens, especially in those strata of society wherein people migrate to work. When you see in those sections, they are ill-treated, very mistreated, and I don't know when it will change, but I certainly hope it changes someday. It really is very bad for an entire region to be mocked and talked about in a certain manner, which is so demeaning. So yeah.
Sir, in a subtle way, they will say बिहारी हो पर लगते नहीं हो.
So when I first came to BIT also, I tell you, and so I'd lived for a year in Delhi. Somehow मेरे accent में शायद बहुत वो बिहार का टोन नहीं आता था. तो some of my friends who had come from other states, they would say, but तुम बिहारी टाइप नहीं बोलते हो. तुम बिहारी लगते नहीं हो.
And they will expect us to be happy about
Yeah,
it.
so I said that's not a compliment. Yeah.
So how do you think we as Biharis can retain the pride in our culture?
Or maybe, sir, is it too late for that?
No, it's not. It's never too late for anything, to be honest. Especially for youngsters like you, I would never say that. Right? Never let's lose hope for any of these things. See, a pride in the culture comes from a lot of associated things. It is only that we do well in other forms that we are also able to take a pride in our culture, right? So if we are not able to do economically well, right, uh, that pride in the culture will be a very hollow thing. So, for example, I'll tell you this: uh, when we were enslaved by the Britishers, we still had a very rich culture, right? But the same Britishers were able to induce a feeling in us that we will not be able to rule ourselves. उनको इसको वो बोलते थे the white man's burden. So they used to say that it is our burden that will have to rule these people because they are incapable of ruling themselves, right? And look at the irony. They're calling us incapable of ruling ourselves when the whole epicenter of republic has been our Vaishali, right? And over 2,000 years ago. So the whole concept of republic and democracy came from this region, which everybody in the world borrowed, and a country which was barely, which became, which became prosperous after, so as to say, colonialization and industrialization. They were telling us that you'll not be able to rule yourselves, and hence we are, taking those pains to rule you. That's what happens when you're not economically also very. Similarly, in your personal lives also. So you'll be able to take a pride in your co-curriculars and extracurriculars only when you're able to do well in your academics. That happens very naturally. So, and hence for Bihar also, Jharkhand also, all these states which we say, so at Jharkhand we say we have 40% of the country's minerals. We are still so exploited, we are still not getting our dues. To be able to assert that, to be able to assert our identities in other ways, which is cultural ways as well. Also draw a parallel. See, most of the influence on Bollywood or books that you would see would always come from the most prosperous regions. So most of the songs, let's say in the Bollywood, apart from Hindi, as you see, would be Punjabi. Yes. Right? They're able to seep it in because they are the most prosperous ones. There's a certain level of confidence and, that pride that comes from there. And Punjabi is not looked down upon. Right? Now look at these, southern film, fraternities. Let's say the Telugu film industry and Malayalam film industry. The stars there say we will not go to Bollywood to work. They are very substandard. That comes from the fact that they are able to do well in the other areas of life, facets of life as well. Right? So it is very, very important that we do well economically, administratively, and so on. And then we will be able to assert our cultural identity. That's what happened. That is what's happening to India also currently. So had we been not been economically so powerful as we are as of now on the world stage, nobody would be talking about our cultural heritage and democracy and so on. Not at all. Nobody cares about that. It is only because we are the 5th largest economy that they care for it and they talk about it.
Adding onto it, Bihar faced a major loss of lingual identity. Bihar is the home to languages and dialects like Mathili, Maghi, Bhojpuri, Angika, Bhajika, and Theti, whatnot. But still, people from Bihar who have migrated to different regions feel ashamed to speak in their own mother tongue, whereas people from other states in India prefer conversing in their own mother tongue, even when they're outside the state or even country. So, what, in your opinion, is the root cause for it?
Exactly the same, because we are so ashamed of where we come from, our surroundings, the kind of things we have seen, the kind of things that happen around us. So there's such a shame in ourselves, a guilt in ourselves, that the day we feel proud of it, we'll be conversing in it, right? So, and that's what I'm saying. You see the people from the developed states or states which are doing well, they're so proud of the culture and they're able to flaunt it everywhere, right? And we are not able to, because we try and hide the fact, because we think when we talk in that language, people will associate the fact that we are from this region, and then they'll associate negative things with us. So it's a very, everything is very connected. Yeah.
Sir, as you have mentioned in your book about the deeply embedded caste segmentation in the roots of Bihar, from small villages to big towns, almost every household is characterized by the caste they belong to. So, why do you think this is so prominent in Bihar and not in other states? Is it just due to vote bank politics, which had happened earlier, or are there any other reasons for it?
So, uh, see, casteism is everywhere, right? Uh, it's in every other state in India. Uh, there's no state which is aloof from it. So even the, let's say the most developed states in the country, Tamil Nadu is, as caste divided a society and as any other state in the India. Maharashtra as well, and caste is also not just a India phenomena. In some or the other ways, there will be certain, uh, ways to identify and divide people in every part of the world. Right? That's human nature. We will try to associate ourselves with a group of people, and hence we'll try to create a common identity characteristic that will divide us from somebody else, right? Uh, in Bihar, so yeah, caste is very prevalent. So what will happen is maybe the proportions of how much of caste do you see playing out, right? In day-to-day life will vary across states. Maybe in Bihar we see that playing out a much more. But that's again got to do much. I think that's got to do much with politics rather than anything else. So what happens is, see, caste was always there, right? Uh, Ever since we read of in different forms maybe. Uh, Caste will always be there. It will not vanish. So irrespective of whatever we maybe think, it will not vanish. At least in our lifetimes, it's not going to vanish. But how it is manifesting in various ways is controlled a lot by the narrative, the politics of the day. So, for example, in states where the narrative becomes more of development or any other thing, you'll start seeing caste taking a backseat. It will not vanish, but you will see that to be the second priority over something else. So, for example, and and, and this can be researched, in fact. So, the best way to research this is maybe in any state elections, you look at all the speeches that their state leaders are delivering, right, of the major parties. You transcribe them, and you see the mention of caste, right? And you see the mention of maybe roads, maybe electricity, maybe education, maybe other social reforms. And that will give you a hint of what's their biggest priority. So in states where other narratives take a precedence, you'll see the mention of caste maybe coming 10% down, 20% down. That will happen. But in states where that narrative has not come in, you will see every final, conversation happening around caste. So they'll pull you in. Every kind of conversation that happens, finally they'll pull you, they'll pull the caste in, right? And I think over the last 1990s specifically, and even after that, what has happened, I think it's a fault of the politics and the politicians as well. They are to be, I think they should be held responsible for this, for the very fact that they have elicited caste much more often than it should be. See, at the end of the day, even the tickets that are distributed, they will be distributed in a fashion which ensures that there is a representation from every caste and section of the society. That will happen. That happens across every state of the country, needless to say. But you need not keep eliciting it every other time, in every other manner, in every other speech. And for example, if you follow the news from Bihar, every second day you'll see there is one leader who made some statement of some other caste, and there's some furor over this, and then people would retaliate from that caste. This keeps happening. And that's the saddest part. So I think if if we are able to slightly bring other narratives and give them a precedence, caste itself will start taking a backseat. That's the only way to do it. You cannot eliminate caste by saying, let's not talk about caste.
So we were proud to read about your social initiative Kartavyapath, where you offer free education to underprivileged children. And on the other hand, you have also worked on developmental issues in Chhattisgarh under the former chief minister. So where do you think you got the maximum opportunity to make social impact and contributions to the nation? Tell us more about your experiences at both these places.
Sure. But before I start, I don't know how many of you know that one of the centers of Kartavyapath is being run at BIT Mesra as well. How many of you know that? Okay. So one of the Kartavyapath centers, so basically we teach mathematics to school-going kids on Sundays. And one of the centers we run at BIT Mesra. It's right behind the canteen. Uh, do you know the school that's just outside the campus fencing? And behind that, there are some quarters. of the staff who largely work in this campus. So for the kids of those staff, we run a center. We just completed first year anniversary of that center last Sunday. Neeraj sir was there. आप शायद यहाँ पे available नहीं थे कुछ. So yeah, that's the added information. If anybody of you want to volunteer, you're more than welcome. So I don't know, I lost the question, but okay, so where did I learn more or contribute more? So I came into, I was in corporate, right? I graduated from here and then from XLRA Jamshedpur. Then I joined corporate like a day zero company, right? And I worked there for 5 years at Asian Paints in Bombay. Somehow it felt like I was not doing justice to the kind of contribution that I would want to make, right? Everybody has their own callings, their own kind of interests, their own kind of things they want to do in life. I thought it was not very, I was not being happy doing what I was doing. And I think that's the one parameter you would always have in life. You should always have in life. You should be happy doing what you're doing. Does not mean you just keep whiling your time, right? But on a very serious note, and you'll not be able to be happy day in and day out. That's also a fallacy. But on a broader scale, when you think of what you're doing and you're able to say, no, I'm broadly happy that I'm doing this, I think that's the path all of us should choose. So from XLRI, I went to this, from Asian Paints, when I was working there, I got this opportunity to work with then Chattisgarh Chief Minister, Dr. Raman Singh, in an advisory role. So I applied there, I went there, I worked there for a year almost. That was quite a, illuminating experience. I was able to, for the first time, I was able to work in bureaucracy. I was able to work with politicians. I was able to work on the ground. I was able to see the real problems. I was able to work on policies. So it was wonderful working on that. It was paying much less, but the satisfaction of working there was much more, right? So I worked there for a year, but after a year closed, we had the state elections in Chattisgarh. And I don't know if any of you are from Chattisgarh. Oh, okay. So in the 2018 December elections, the BJP lost the power there and Congress came into power. And, we had a new chief minister in the name of Mr. Bhupesh Baghel. This is the sad part of politics, wherein what happens is every time a government changes, they don't like the people who have been appointed by the previous government. So they remove all of them, generally. So I was, thrown out of my job. One day in a morning newspaper, I read that my position has ceased to exist. So I said, oh, that's okay. So I introspected a lot as to what was, what should I do next? And the obvious options were, one, returning to corporate. The second was, trying to do a very similar kind of, some kind of a social kind of initiative with any other government, any of these NGOs and so on. So I took my 2-3 months of time to think over this very deeply. But then what I realized in the 1 year of being in Chhattisgarh is, I'd realized the huge impact of politics. So for example, what happens is, any kind of things that you see happening around you, there are people who are doing it. So for example, the bureaucracy will carry out a lot of policies, will carry out a lot of schemes of the government. And they may be able to carry out it in certain way, which is very efficient. But that is where their role ends. They cannot shape the narrative. They cannot decide the policy. They cannot decide the scheme. So they'll work with whatever is just given to them. Same with any other area. So I'm not demeaning the other areas of work. But on a social level, when I see the narrative being created, the policies, the schemes and everything being created, it is all being done by politics and the politicians. That was my one line of conclusion in the 3 months of intense thought, right? And so I thought, if I had to drive any kind of the smallest kind of changes that I really wanted to, and for which I was drawn into the role at Chhattisgarh, I thought it's better that I should get deeper into it, and that meant joining politics, right? And hence there were some connections that I was able to make, and hence I came back. And when you have to join politics, you have to be in your own home state, your own hometown, right? So I came back to Ranchi. I started working with BJP, and in 2019 Lok Sabha elections, I started working with them. Then there were state elections as well. And in 1 year of, and so I had given myself a year of time, right? Because I knew it would be very difficult for somebody like me who comes from no background in politics, no experience of politics, or not even a family which is, very hugely influential financially or in those terms, everybody in the city knows them. So of course they can get into politics. Not those kind of families. Come from a very middle class family. So I knew it was very difficult to crack, but I wanted to give it a chance. I gave myself an year saying, I'll try for an year. And if at the end of the year, I'll evaluate. And if I see something moving, I'll stay. Otherwise, corporate zindabad hai hamesha ke liye. And I think that everybody around me was honestly very skeptical. My father was very skeptical, although he's very, very supportive. But he was like, yaar, tum politics type lagte nahi ho, karoge kya politics? Right? And so was everybody else, all my friends, family. But I appreciate them for the very fact that they supported me. They said, "Jo man hai, kar lo, matlab usme kuch nahi hai." And they gave me that free hand for a year. I worked day and night, and I slogged like any other corporate employee, to be honest. And by the time a year ended, I was made a part of the state executive committee of the party. I was leading their social media, and then I started leading their election management. It was clear that I was able to barge my, foot into the door, right? And I thought I have entered at least. I can be here and I can work and I can do things. But when this happened, what I also realized is politics is a very, very long-term, thing. So if somebody says, I want to make a change, I want to create an impact, in politics to be, and specifically again, why I'm reiterating this, it matters a lot what background you come from. So if you do not come from a background and you start in politics and say, I want to make a change, it will take you years before you reach a position of influence, and then you are able to influence the policies and the narratives and the schemes and so on. And so I said to myself, I cannot wait for 10 years or 20 years to make a change. Until then, I'll keep saying, okay, जब मैं उस जगह पे पहुंचूंगा तब मैं कुछ बदलूंगा. So I did not like this, kind of a journey. So I said, let's do whatever is possible day in and day out, right? And there is where Kartavyapath was born. So I said, what is the least that I can do? I was also very short of time so I also, started running a startup because I had to sustain myself financially. So my startup partner also comes from BIT. He's a 99 batch pass out, 10 years senior to me. So he runs Career Launcher, if any of you know. Yeah. So I was running a startup, I was doing politics, so I was very short of time, I was short financially. So I said, what is it that I can do to contribute? So I said, the least that I can do is I can teach some kids on a Sunday, right? So I can find time. So I started teaching some 15 kids around my house. It was a very underprivileged kind of not a very structured place. So I started teaching around 15 kids on a certain Sunday. The next Sunday it went to 20, and then 25, 30. And then my elder sister joined in. She said, she teaches in one of the DAV Hale, in fact. So she said, I would also want to join in. So she joined in. Then there are a couple of other friends who stay in Ranchi. They were working out of home for other corporates. They said, we'll also join in. We don't do anything substantial on Sundays. So they also joined in. So one center was up and running. And then there are people from a very nearby location. They came. They said, हमारे यहाँ भी आके पढ़ा दीजिए, हमारे यहाँ भी बहुत सारे बच्चे हैं. And hence we started a second center. And similarly, a third center got started, and a fourth center got started. In fact, in BIT, there are some research scholars, very close to me. They used to come to teach in those centers, which is close to my home, at Daladali Chowk. So very far from here. So they said, can we start a center at BIT itself? So I said, more than happy to, So they, contacted these people and they said, we'll start a center here. So that got started a year ago. So we currently run those 5 centers, and we teach almost 200 kids. We teach them mathematics on Sundays, right? And we have been able to see a lot of change in those kids, right? It is not just about learning to do those sums, but it is also about being exposed to a completely different world. For the kind of people who come and talk to them and teach them, they get exposed to so much that they would have not gotten exposed to, if they were not interacting with them. So I think, and a lot of confidence and change that I see day in and day out in them, and that gives me a lot of happiness. So my Sunday mornings, unless I'm traveling or something, it's very sacrosanct. I'm going to go and teach those kids, And most of the centers, I know these kids by name, all of them by name. So they are also very happy to see us. And the moment we arrive at the centers, they would start jumping and playing and so that's a very, very happy feeling when we do that. So that was born out of the very fact that none of us should wait to reach a certain position or place to be able to make change. Uh, it is in every day that we can do something very small, minor, that may not look substantial, but it's significant change, I would say. Yeah.
So there are many people in the audience who want to ask some questions.
I think, or they'll get bored and yes, please.
So we take some questions from the audience.
Yeah.
Hello. Sir, it's high time we talked about this, that at a time when...
State your name, please. I would love
Sir,
to know your name and what you do.
I am Shashank from Mechanical Engineering Department, 4th year. Since it's a time when class lines are no longer congruent with caste lines, what do you think is the future of caste in India? Your views.
Caste in India, they're going to stay. See what happens. Look, to be able to evaluate any of these things, you should think on first principles. All of us are humans. As humans, our tendency will always be, so for example, when some of us migrate to the US, right? You'll see in US, all of us identify ourselves as Indians. We'll form an Indian community. All lines will blur, right? Because we need an identifier which connects all of us. So Indian, right? When all of you from here, so for example, let's say all of you are from Ranchi. When you go to Delhi, you'll all identify yourselves as coming from Ranchi, or a Bihari, or a Jharkhandi. So that's your identifier. When you are here, then you'll start identifying by some other means, maybe geography, maybe the background you come from, kind of schools you come from. Happens, right? The kind of what you've studied in graduation, maybe through that. And hence we'll always need something to identify ourselves with and to connect and form a smaller group. And caste serves that purpose. And why it serves the purpose very strongly? Because it has a historical lineage. So that gives it legitimacy. Other lineages are very short-lived. So for example, you might be living in Ranchi, your father may have been living in Patna. So you'll not be able to connect so much to it. But when somebody says caste, you say, oh, my forefathers have been coming from this caste for thousands of years. And hence you say somewhere down the line, let's say 10 generations, 20 generations, earlier we were related. And going further, so for example, let's say all of the people in this room were from the same caste, then what would happen? You'll start identifying yourselves from Gotra. But you will always find something to identify. And hence I'm saying, also, understand, the pragmatic and the practical and the right approach is not to eliminate caste or to villainize it or to say, galat cheez hai, iske bare mein mat baat karo. The more you say that, the more it will happen. So yes, it should be an identity like any other identities. It should be a cultural identity maybe. Caste in our Hindu society has been related with occupations, which is lately blurring, right? But it could be a cultural identity. It could be, something which you take pride in the very fact that, you come from a legacy. There are certain traits of that which distinguish it from other people. The problem starts happening when there is a layering of it or a sequencing of it, or saying this is on a higher pedestal and this is on a lower pedestal. The moment you keep it all equal, right? Saying, acha, ye ek different caste hai, ye different hai, inka aisa thoda traits hota. It is something like sunshines. Aries or Libra or Sagittarius में कौन अच्छा है? कोई भी नहीं. सब अलग-अलग है ना? Same. So the moment it comes to that, the problem will be sorted.
I remember reading a book by writer Mark Tully. He was a journalist. He wrote about how caste renders a sense of kinship, a belonging to people. So what do you think exactly led to caste lines being caste divides? What in history led to this?
So historically, if you see, the problem started happening, I think, when people started identifying some castes as being superior to some other castes, right? As also, you know, you would see different castes have different economic prowess. Earlier, in terms of land, land was the only economic resource. Let's say when we talk about 100 years ago, there was nothing else. Land and maybe gold, right? That's it. And there, wherever whichever caste had more land, right, they started become economically more powerful, and they would be able to then exploit the caste which did not have land. That created a more vicious circle of exploitation, right? And hence that divide kept getting stronger and stronger, right? Now that should have been, blurred out. That should have been worked upon after we were independent. Uh, Facts like land sealing acts, abolition of zamindari, and so on should have been much more efficient, so that land was redistributed in a manner that everybody, could come at a certain level, if not exactly equal. But then what also happened is politicians saw a lot of opportunity into this. They saw the very fact that if we are able to use those fault lines to our benefit, we'll be able to usurp and retain power. So a lot of politicians used it very, you know, in a very, very smart manner to be able to say, you know, that this caste, I come from your caste, and hence you should only give me a chance to lead it, because it is only me who will be able to empathize with your problems, to be able to understand your problems, and I'll be only able to solve your problems. Right? And you would have heard of that quote wherein it says, कि वो जंगल में वो लकड़हारा गया और लकड़हारा पेड़ काटता रहा और पेड़ कटता रहा, क्योंकि पेड़ को लगा कि वो जो कुल्हाड़ी में लकड़ी जो लगी हुई है वो मेरी ही जाति से आती है. Right? So a lot of politicians, I think, some of the politicians were very, very, so for example, Lohia, Karpuri Thakur, they tried to register that protest, that what was not happening right. And they tried to bring in social reforms, and they tried to reform it as a society. But some of the other leaders, for example, Lalu Prasad Yadav, he used it for his own benefit. He said, if these fault lines are blurred, I will not be able to create a vote bank. So they use those fault lines to create their own vote bank. And hence it persists even today.
Last question. There was a chapter in the book Ranveer Sena. So I read that chapter, was not amazed. I have heard those stories since childhood. I could not exactly identify in the book the exact cause of the spark that led to those massacres from both the sides.
Okay. See, so massacres happened in Bihar even before 90s. So for example, one of the most infamous massacres that happened in 1977, there's a massacre called Belchi massacre. And it is very famous because, one, it was very unique because both the parties that were involved, none of them were upper castes. So the massacres were done by Kurmis, who themselves are a OBC caste, but in certain areas a landowning caste. And the people who were massacred were Dalits, right? There was another massacre, a big massacre that happened in 1987 in Aurangabad. It's in Dhalilchak, Bhagora. So there, Rajputs were massacred, right? But these were very disconnected and for different reasons. They had their own reasons, which was very localized and economic. The kind of massacres that happened in 90s had a very common link, you would say. They were very commonly linked. It started with 1992 with the Bara massacre. What would spark it, I would say, is 1990 was the era when the Mandal Commission came in, right? So the Mandal Commission came in, the reservations for the OBC castes came in. And that created a lot of, so there was a lot of resistance from the upper castes, right? And there's a lot of, violent also, and there's a lot of protest also that happened. So the tensions were already high. Now, Lalu saw a very good opportunity into this. So he came out as a very a messiah of the backwards. And he said, ki, I am the one who'll stand by them and who'll see that, these reservations are implemented and not going to go away. Which is not unique because it was implemented nationally. So the state had got nothing to do with it, to be honest. And it got implemented in every state in the country and in the same manner. But Lalu thought it was a good opportunity to say that, see, these people are resisting the change to bring reservations to you, and I'm the one who's standing by you. So that makes me your kind of messiah. Right? And now to widen that divide, what Lalu would very often do is to keep quoting this. And if you have read the book, I've quoted certain of his lines wherein he would say, see, social revolutions are a very, very tricky thing, right? In certain ways, it would look like, and if any of you have seen one of my podcasts that is with ABP News, I've recited one of my poems, which is called Kranti, right? So I'll quote it maybe in certain time. So social revolutions are very tricky. Most of the cases wherever social revolutions have happened successfully, it has happened very gradually. And in most of the cases wherever social revolutions have come with bloodshed and violent methods, it has never created a lasting impact. Never in the world. You can see a cross, you'll never find an example in the world. It will just change the power, but it will not bring a long-term good. So social changes could come through policies, and hence I always quote this in a lot of interviews, the ideologies of Karpuri Thakur versus Lalu Prasad Yadav. So Karpuri Thakur ji talked about reservation, you would not believe, in 1978. तभी मंडल कमीशन फॉर्म भी नहीं हुआ, फॉर्म जस्ट हुआ था. उस समय कोई रिजर्वेशन के बारे में सोचता नहीं था. And he spoke about that. And he said it is very important to bring it because there are sections of society which need to be brought at par with other sections. And again, उस समय भी बहुत resistance हुआ. But उन्होंने किसी को भी गाली नहीं दी. उन्होंने उनको भी बुला के समझाया. Logically समझाया, क्यों जरूरत है, क्यों करना चाहिए. मुंगेरी लाल कमीशन बनाया. Right? That's the way to do it. And but when you do it the Lalu way, you already widen the divide that's already there, right? And hence, what Lalu did was, now he saw that as a very, very good chance to, consolidate his vote bank. So he made statements like, "Ab kurte ke upar ganji pehnne ka samay aa gaya hai." But let's invert the structure, which can never be practical. Whenever you will try to invert the structure, the other side will resist. And they will also try to invert the structure. So it will be a continuous battle of who leads. It can only be a conciliation that can bring a social revolution, not inverting the structures. Right? ऊंची जातियों के घरों से ऊंची बिल्डिंग बनाओ. So it looks very nice to hear, and जो electorate है उस समय, and बिहार में specifically in the 90s, बहुत आप educated लोग expect नहीं कर सकते. And this sounded very nice. यार ये तो हमारी बात कर रहा है. Such passionate, lines. He's talking for us, about us. He's not talking for them. He's talking just about himself. And that kept on creating that divide and divide and divide. And that divide was what culminated into that invert the structure, and the other side started resisting. And that led to massacres and retaliations, massacres and retaliations, massacres and retaliations for the next 8 years. I see it as a manifestation of the very fact that you try to, giving a right to the marginalized is not wrong, right? But the way in which you do it is very, very important. Rather than, if you're really concentrated on the end result, you would do it in a manner which, and I quote this very often again. I say, let's say, these other castes, let's say the OBC castes are some of the better to do castes than, let's say, the EBCs or the Dalits, right? Now, the divisions between the upper caste and the OBC caste, you would see they have narrowed down across the country. right? In the socio-economic censuses that you see. Now, let's say in Bihar, if Lalu says, I did something which is unprecedented, that divide should have been narrowed much earlier, right? That divide should have gone away in those 10, 15 years, but it did not. Even in the last census that happened, just, the caste census and in Bihar, they still lag, behind the upper castes, and specifically his own caste. That's the irony. Yeah.
Anyone has any other questions? Okay.
Hello, sir. I am Harshit Sagar, a third year student of Computer Science Department. So, sir, as you are also affiliated with politics, how did you avoid political bias when writing your book?
That's a very good question. So, see, to be honest, no writer in the world can claim that when they are writing a non-fiction, they'll not be able to, they'll make it 100% neutral, and their own biases would not creep in. So, how much soever I may say that I've tried to keep every personal bias of my aside, and it's very neutral. Uh, I'm very open to the fact and the possibility that my biases could have crept in, right? But on a very professional level, on the process side, how I have tried to minimize it, I would say, is uh, first of all, when you read the book, I have tried not to write anything in the book which does not have very solid references. So, for example, even if the incidents that you read in the book, there would be references for them at the end of the book, in the end notes. There were certain very gruesome, very interesting incidents that I also know of. Most of us would have heard of, but I found certain holes in those stories. And hence, I decided to drop the entire episode. So, for example, I don't know if any of you have heard of this very infamous story called the Champa Vishwas rape case in Bihar. Normal search would give you at least 10, 20 different stories about. So Champa Vishwas used to be the wife of an IS officer in Bihar, and she was allegedly raped for almost 2 years by RJD men, right? And his husband, who was her husband, who was the IS officer, kept pleading to everybody in the powers in Bihar, and nobody supported them, and then they had to move out and so on. But then, when you read a lot of different versions, then there are versions wherein it said that Champa Vishwas initially, it was not a rape, it was a extramarital affair and so on. And somehow I thought, I was not very convinced with what was happening in those different stories, right? So I thought, let's not put it. So everything that I've tried to put in the book, it has to have a very, very solid reference. And a solid reference does not mean somebody's blog, right? A very credible source. That's the first thing I've taken as a sign of neutrality. Second, you would see I've tried to, for example, for Nitish also, for example, when I start the book, you would see I praise Lalu a lot for the kind of hope that he's become of Bihar. When you start reading the chapter on Nitish, the first chapter is praising Nitish like anything. Because his term in 2005 to 2010 was something which was exceptional. And the kind of job that he did was exceptional. But when I come to the second part of the same chapter, I start criticizing him a lot, right? So I think through that, you can slide, for any author, you can see. So for example, if there's a consistent praise or criticism of a certain party, then you can say he's biased towards that. But if there's not a consistency in terms of praise or criticism, I think you could take it that he has taken both the sides. Third, what I also try to do very, very cautiously, when I finished the book and to write the endorsements, I reached out to a lot of people, and none of them were BJP leaders, which could have been the easiest thing for me to do, and they would have been the most popular names for the book to sell, maybe, or something like that. But I said I'll only send it to people, and all of these people, that the endorsements that you read in the book, let's say Pawan Verma, Abhyan Ji, Jayaprakash Narayan, Parakala Prabhakar, there are a couple more, in fact. Uh, and Parakala Prabhakar is a strong critic of the government. He's one of the strongest critics of Modi government, in fact. The others as well. Jayaprakash Narayan is a left-leaning person, in fact, right? Pawan Verma is associated with, now associated with Jan Suraj, earlier with JDU. So I tried to, and all of these people read the entire manuscript before agreeing for an endorsement because they didn't know me, to be honest. Right? And after they read the book, they said, in spite of the fact that you come from this party, it did not come across in the book, and hence I'll endorse it. And so 5, 6 such people, let's endorsing it also gives me a, at least give me the confidence that what I've written, it comes across as neutral. So yeah, that's the entire process of it, I would say. Any other questions? Yes.
So I just have a small question about the part where you mentioned that, like nowadays and even in the past, that people, kind of mock Bihar, the entire state, and people of Bihar also are kind of little ashamed to associate themselves with their state, which is kind of unfortunate. So, what I would like to ask you is, do you think that this phenomenon that's happening is more, does it have its roots due to the colonial rule, or was it more indigenous? Like, did it originate in India?
Not at all. So if you see, so for example, see, Bihar had the most, I would say, glorious legacy in our country or any part of the world. Anything that you can trace the history, their history back to. So for example, as I said, Republic originated in Bihar, right? The world's largest kingdom of that time, the Magadha Empire, started from there, right? It's not just administration. You take Chanakya was there, right? So politics. You take sciences, Aryabhat, right? You take Jainism, you take Buddhism, you take Nalanda University. Any kind of field, astronomy, health. So any field and their origins, if you start tracing it back, it would go somewhere around Bihar. So the most glorious legacy. So of course, it does not come from a very historic background. Even during independence, Bihar played a very, very important role. I think it is more of a very post-independence phenomena. A more of the phenomena wherein this entire region started, lagging in the development part. And then what started happening, people from here started to migrate to other regions of the country for work. And most of this was menial work, hard work. Initially, they started migrating to the fields of Punjab to work in their fields, right? And when you start migrating to some regions to work in menial areas, you start getting, they start looking down upon you. Same happens anywhere in the world, you would see. And this is a very common phenomenon. So they start associating you with that, right? That is where the problem started. Even if we had started migrating for, let's say, more value-added jobs, technical jobs, they would not, look down upon us. Because for the fact, and when, let's say, they start saying you coming from that region, so they assume that you don't have enough food, enough, means to survive there. They start taking you as poor, they start taking you as, the most backward of the regions, right? And when you start dispersing in every part of the country, then a narrative starts, that is where that problem started happening. And hence I said, unless you are powerful economically, even your culture would not come forward to help you.
So we would love to hear the poem Kranti from you.
I just, so I write a lot of Hindi poetry and मैं नीरज सर के सामने पढ़ रहा हूँ इसके लिए तो कविता का शीर्षक है क्रांति। लोगों का हुजूम, लाल झंडे, इनकलाब के नारे, पुलिस की लाठियां और खून के फव्वारे ही महज क्रांति के सूचक नहीं है। स्कूल जाते बच्चे, लहलहाते खेत, शाम चिड़ियों की चहचहाट में काम से लौटती औरतें, पार्क में दादियों का झुंड और किलकारियां करते बच्चे भी हो सकते हैं द्योतक क्रांति के।
That was a very beautiful poem, sir. With that, we have reached towards the end of this enlightening session. Thank you, sir, for sharing your insights with us and taking up all our questions and answering them diligently. We are grateful to you for taking out the time from your hectic schedule and gracing us with your indomitable presence. I, on the behalf of the Literary Society BIT Mesra, extend my heartfelt gratitude for the same. And once again, let's give a huge round of applause for Sir.
Thank you.
हाँ, थैंक यू। तो सर, चूंकि आज सब कंक्लूड हो चुका है और हम धन्यवाद देना चाहेंगे। धन्यवाद कई चीज़ों के लिए। सबसे पहले इस किताब के लिए। मेरा इंजीनियरिंग जीवन समाप्त होने वाला है, चौथा साल है, अब सब खत्म है। सर, 4 सालों में इंजीनियरिंग से ज़्यादा साहित्य, संस्कृति और राजनीति पढ़े हैं। और बहुत ज़्यादा प्रयास था कि बिहार के बारे में कोई लिखे, बिहार के बारे में कोई चर्चा करे। कोई कोई किताब कुछ ऐसा नहीं लिखा हुआ है जो बिहार के स्ट्रगल पर हो, बिहार की राजनीति पर हो। बचपन से पापा से सुनने को मिलता था, कॉलेज में नीरज सर से जान पहचान हुई तो नीरज सर से कुछ सुनने को मिला बिहार के बारे में, उस दारुण कालखंड के बारे में जहाँ बिहार दबा गया, कुचला गया और राजनीति के फेर में फंस गया। और सर, सबसे ज़्यादा आभार इस किताब को लिखने के लिए। जब हम इस किताब को अपने पिताजी को सुना रहे थे और पिताजी के चेहरे पर वो प्राउड स्माइल थी कि मेरा बेटा इस किताब को पढ़ रहा है, और साथ ही वो टिप्पणी की है कि अपने तरफ से आभार देना इनको जिन्होंने ये किताब लिखी है। तो सर, किताब लिखने के लिए बहुत आभार और कॉलेज आने के लिए बहुत आभार। जब से सर बताए थे कि मृत्युंजय जी से जान पहचान हो सकती है, तब से ललक रहे थे हम लोग कि सर से एक बार बात हो जाए, एक बार भेंट हो जाए। तो सर, इस सेशन के लिए बहुत आभार। थैंक यू वेरी मच।
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, yeah. Teach on Sundays. Just come and teach. Yes, I'll give you the contact of the person who runs it here. Just, I'll also give.